No mai, hoki mai ki other fold, imahine ko Duncan Grieve tōku ingoa. Welcome, Glenn. Another Tuesday edition, though we're recording early on a Friday, so even more caveats than usual if anything blows up in between time. But welcome along.
Kia ora, Duncan. Good to be here, as always.
So we're going to talk today about two big issues. The largest part of it will be about the arrival of Max to New Zealand, which is the WBD channel, formerly known as HBO Max in the US, but doing that through Neon and in partnership, which brings with it a whole lot of good things for Sky, but also some risk. We'll take a little look at Amazon Prime announcing an ad tier for New Zealand and what that does to the market. And then at the end, we'll talk about the departure of relatively recent fold guest, Craig Fenton, the CEO of New Zealand Rugby Commercial, after 8 months in the job, 9 months in the job, and an unusually sort of pointy statement issued, even though he is actually working out his notice until January, and what might have driven that, and what it says about the sort of negotiations with Sky and some other aspects of what they're trying to do commercially there. But this WBD Sky deal, it's obviously something, you know these companies both very well, one particularly so. What was your sort of reaction to it?
Yeah, so full disclaimer for the audience. Obviously, I used to lead the Warner Brothers Discovery operation here in New Zealand, and have some insight into how these partnerships come together. I certainly haven't been involved in recent times for obvious reasons. I'm no longer with the company, but lots and lots of thoughts, and I think fundamentally this is a good thing for both companies. It's a smart way to enter the market for WBD with the Max brand.
What would the alternative have been, I guess, is worth kind of canvassing, and I'm sure they would have weighed it up.
Yeah. So, look, the alternative would have been launching Max independently for the global technology platform in the market with all the bells and whistles, all the content, and all the optionality that can come on the back of that, the likes of CNN and other things. The challenge being in a subscale market like New Zealand, the path to profit can take time.
You have to spend a lot of money to market it, whereas this is turnkey and it's immediately revenue, right?
It's immediately revenue. And this model is what's called around the world where studios do this, called an ingest model, where effectively a partner like Sky create a branded home, in this case Max. They distribute that home across their base of consumers. All that content is found within that branded environment. And there's a couple of interesting things about that. So one is, from a Sky point of view, very strong association with, I know I'm biased on this, but arguably the deepest and broadest content catalogue and probably the most premium content catalogue in the world as of today. So it creates a very clear association in that world, which is good from Sky's point of view because that's going to help acquisition of audience, it's going to help mitigate churn, et cetera, et cetera. From a WBD point of view, by having this ingest model, it allows them to not just only establish the brand, but also the way these models are constructed to recognise the fact that those subscribers, they can recognise back in part of their global business.
So you're right. So that will be attributed into, when they're talking about their subscriber numbers, they basically in one tie-up added the 300,000 odd, I'm not sure what the kind of current figure is, but Neon subscribers just go straight to their global total, which if they were doing it independently would have been a big and expensive task to get to that number. It's interesting, right, because so I'm just looking at the press release from Sky and WBD here, and I'll just call out some of the names of the shows because ultimately we can talk about the business, but ultimately for a consumer, this is about the show. So they've talked about June Prophecy, which is a big expensive show that's coming out of the June franchise, the new seasons of The Last of Us, The White Lotus, Euphoria. Now, those are all things which a Neon subscriber would have naturally expected to get anyway. So it's worth noting that Sky has taken not all, a show like Hacks, which was on bought independently by TVNZ Plus, was outside of the deal. But a lot of the stuff was already there. It's the breadth of the catalogue. So they've talked about Friends, The Big Bang Theory, Rick and Morty, and DC Universe shows, TLC, Animal Planet, Cartoon Network, and Harry Potter. Harry Potter, I think, is all on Neon at the moment, but there's just going to be a huge volume of show. Friends is one of the most powerful kind of catalog franchises, and there's just a huge bomb of content coming in, which is for Neon, which had felt like it was a bit like it had stalled to an extent. Amazing service. That's certainly the one that I watched the most in terms of total time spent, but largely using it for catalog and the occasional new thing, which is just versus Netflix, which is dropping just massive new shows across a huge range of genres every week now. Neon can't quite compete with that. This gives them not full competition there, but on the catalog side, it just becomes, as you said, so deep and broad.
Yeah, so all of those shows that weren't, some of those shows that you referred to over time, because this deal is exclusive, those shows will all come back into the Sky environment from wherever they were.
So Hacks goes off TVNZ.
It will, no doubt.
Could that be because they only launched that, I think, maybe 6 months ago. Will that happen immediately or over time?
Depends on the nature of the license agreement that's in place. But over time, the whole intention is to create a home for all of the Warner Brothers Discovery content under the Max brand. So that'll all come back. The second thing is that you raise a point around just the volume, quantum, and quality of the content that is there. What this allows is, from a consumer point of view, to be able to go in and start to find that content reasonably cleanly and clearly. And the new content, if I go back, 12 months or 18 months actually, Hollywood was in a spot of bother. There were strikes going on in Hollywood. A lot of content slowed in terms of its production and wasn't making it onto the big streaming platforms that affected everyone. But the flow-through impact of that on Sky was that it really hurt Neon. They weren't able to grow at the same rate. You had a cost of living crisis where people were churning away. The content wasn't there to pull them back. That's all just changed again because now obviously there's this huge uplift of being able to bring the Warner Brothers Discovery Library through the Max brand, but also the pipeline of production is very, very, very strong over the next couple of years that Sky will benefit from.
So that's the sort of upside of it for Sky, and it's very real, and they've kind of needed a win like this, and you can see, just looking at the Sky share price over the past 7 days. The announcement came Tuesday. It's up 7%. That's not trivial for in a challenged environment, and it's indicative of this being seen as a potential competitor going off the board and a huge content library coming into something which had been, like I say, if not struggling, then potentially a bit stalled in terms of a growth story.
Well, and I think, it was interesting because when Sky put their release out, it was noted as being price sensitive, right? Which means that indication really of its relevance to the Sky shareholders. And from my perspective, the relevance is a couple of things. One, as you point out, it means that from a competitor set, they've removed that threat from the table. Secondly, they're in the midst of a fairly meaty New Zealand rugby negotiation right now. So to lose a really compelling entertainment proposition, could have been quite challenging in terms of how they figure out their future, their consumer proposition. They've anchored that now, and all eyes go on to the rugby negotiation, of course. But if they can land both those things in constructive ways, they're in pretty good shape, for the next few years.
Yeah, and that would have been, if you think about the start of the year and what they were looking at, and almost defining negotiations for Sophie Maloney's kind of early period as CEO.
Yeah.
If she can land both of those, that will be a tremendous win. Yep. The big advantage she has in a way is that she's negotiating them both at a time when the New Zealand economy is in this pretty tough state and there's much less competition. So, perfect time to be doing that, to pay, a reduced price for things which would have, even a couple of years ago commanded a premium.
There is an interesting, just on the competition front, what's interesting about this is, we've talked about Netflix a lot on the show, and you've got Max globally around the world deploying as fast as it possibly can, partly because trying to chase, obviously, Netflix as everyone is, but also partly because it needs a really strong growth story to resonate with the market. So hence an aggressive rollout around the world, of which this is part of. But they're not the only ones. You've got NBCU with Peacock. You've got Paramount with Paramount Plus. Those brands are not in New Zealand yet. Now, they potentially suffer from the same challenge around trying to launch Max independently in the market, around the cost of doing so is challenging in a subscale market. But replicating a model similar to this could occur. It's unlikely to think that Sky would probably pick up all three. That seems probably cost prohibitive. But could there be an opening now where you see one of those partners come to TVNZ as part of their paywall proposition and do something similar? So I'd say watch this space.
Yeah, that feels like a sort of an extremely, with this having gone off the board, and that will take some content options away from TVNZ. They sort of need something like this, especially if as the paywall option that they've alluded to. They need something that they can put behind there. But the risk for TVNZ is that it Sky is plugging this into an existing customer base and a subscription-driven business model. They would be paying a hefty price. Typically, is this done on a per subscriber basis, or is there is a wholesale fee and then it's up to you to take the margin if you're on the Sky side or the TVNZ side?
Look, I don't know the final terms of how this deal was done, but it's a mix. It can go either way. There are different ways of putting these models together. Sky will be paying for the premium of having that exclusive contract. Yeah. Clearly, Warner Brothers are very happy with that. To be able to cement the deal. And the interesting thing is, it hasn't been talked about around how long the deal is.
So that's the thing that's most interesting to me, because there is a world where this is this is introduced to and marketed by Sky. People get really into this content. They get accustomed to the idea of the Max brand. And then at the end of the deal, maybe the economic cycles turn, maybe the cost of entering the market are lower for some reason. Certainly the brand is established, which is the big expensive part, and they take it back. Neon is not only kind of loses the catalog, and which people have gotten used to, but a lot of what makes Neon so compelling now, even before this deal was announced, was HBO content and WBD content. So that's the sort of the threat of it, is that depending on the length of it, they face another renegotiation. In some, I've been asking around about the length, haven't been able to get it. But if that is a relatively short deal term, that becomes a future problem for Sky. Now, the subscale market, that is a strong moat. Like Sky just having, you can consider Sky a place with just a massive database and some really strong customer connections, and it just puts stuff through that. And if you're wanting to come into this market, that the cost of, Sky has spent 30 years building that, and do you want to start from scratch again in a tiny market? That might be a forever defensible moat. I genuinely believe that. But there's always that tension with any renegotiation. They could just say, actually, screw it, we're going direct.
Yeah, I mean, we've just talked about the benefits of Sky around doing this deal, and I think they're very real and very genuine. But for the benefits from WBD perspective, they've just created huge optionality for their future in the market. Sky are effectively paying the cost of establishing that Max brand. They're carrying the cost of tech. They're carrying the cost of acquisition of audience, managing churn on the Neon platform. And so there's pressure on Sky to perform. And I think over the next couple of years, as Sky works through the rugby negotiation, secures that, and they know what their future kind of content footprint starts to look like. If you're WBD, you're expecting to see something like Neon become a very strong part of their future if you want this relationship to stay over the very long term, because they will want to see an increase in subs and an increase in engagement with that WBD content. Otherwise, they will look to, as you say, the alternative and what they can do on their own.
So let's move on to talking about Amazon Prime's announcement, which I think came through yesterday, that they will be launching an ad tier of the service here, which both makes it creates a cheaper way of getting into Prime, as a service, but there's also a whole business side of it too, in terms of that's just yet more premium ad inventory, which on some level competes with the likes of TVNZ Plus and Free Now. What do you make of that announcement?
Yeah, well, I think you and I have different views on the Prime platform. I think just talking before the pod this morning. So
well, let's get into that. What? Because you're a believer, and I'm sort of slightly cynical about it. Tell me the believer's case.
Well, a few things. Amazon don't have a warehousing fulfillment solution in New Zealand, and so Prime is not distributed in the same way as it is around other markets like Australia and US. So you have to choose to engage with it. You have to choose to pay for it. I do, and I think some of their originals that they have produced over the years have been really compelling and really good. They are looking to do more and more of that. There's that constant kind of tension in Hollywood around how much are we spending on these shows. I'm right in the middle. I'm a late to it, but right in the middle of the Jack Ryan series at the moment. It's brilliant, really well put together. And I think that this offer, by putting ads in, and by the way, let's just talk about what they did around ads around the world, different to Netflix, where they decided to add an ad tier. In America, they just forced everyone onto the ad tier, then you had to opt out to pay the premium from the subscribers.
It's a real Amazon approach.
It was brilliant because it just built incredible scale in the advertising overnight, and kind of dwarfed everyone else in the streaming wars, other than YouTube, of course. Now, if they take the same approach here, one, I think my argument is that you'll see a lot of advertising of Amazon Prime in the New Zealand market at a really cost-effective price point to undercut all the other streaming solutions that are currently in New Zealand. That will build scale of audience. I think the other thing it'll do, which is a worry, I think, for TVNZ Plus and 3Now, is it will bring a lot of premium video inventory in the market, put downward pressure on CPM at a time when TVNZ Plus and 3Now need to be held high, and kind of would like to be owning that space as much as possible.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that's... So look, I accept that, and I'll kind of make my bear case for it shortly, but the other thing that Amazon have, and they've had, that basically their whole margin is advertising now.
Mm-hmm.
They run everything else at sort of break even and almost a Costco type model, and where they win is it's Prime subscriptions, which and in advertising, particularly sort of effectively search ads within their own shopping platform. But because an Amazon Prime account is linked to your Amazon sort of shopping account, they have far more data about consumer and household preferences with which to link to the advertising side. Now that still feels quite nascent, and and how you get to scale to where you can match the intricacies of someone's kind of lifelong shopping baskets to what you're showing to them. That's not completely built out, but it will only get better, and it's already pretty strong, and that's where you see the sort of genius of what they're doing. My general issue with Prime is not in the idea of it; it's actually the execution. Like Lord of the Rings, with all due respect to beloved, friend of the spin-off and frequent director for us, Leon Wadham, who's a star of it, doesn't seem to have landed culturally in the same way that either the movies did or Game of Thrones, the kind of close competitor. They have a lot of Jack Ryan type shows, Jack Reacher, probably some other Jacks too, that kind of hit a kind of a broad market, and maybe that's the thing. It's actually just going for a more sort of network TV type audience versus I'm an HBO kind of aesthete type person, so I might not be the market, but it certainly doesn't feel like the talkability. And when you look at like Parrot Analytics and those, or the kind of Ringer streaming charts, the Prime shows don't seem to kind of cut through, with some exceptions, like The Boys, in the same way that the sort of the hit Max, Disney Plus, let alone Netflix, or even Apple TV shows do. And so they're sort of, it feels to me like they're reliant on being the second streaming service that you subscribe to, and that might be enough of a business, but because in New Zealand they don't have warehousing, so the Prime proposition in the US or in Australia is you almost get Prime as a TV service as a gift with purchase.
That's right.
When you're mainly paying for free shipping for Amazon. That doesn't exist here. I don't know when it will because of there being a small market. And as a result, I just think that they'll struggle to overcome the fact that their content is quite good, but it's not dazzling, and it's quite high volume, but it's not Netflix level.
Yeah, I would say watch this space because they last year launched free shipping from Amazon Australia for orders over $50 to try and make Amazon more accessible. If they can grow Amazon Prime with the ad unit, you can probably guarantee that the first ad you're going to see is an Amazon ad, and I think they will start to flood the market more, and that's going to be a greater risk to the the retailers here in New Zealand as they increase their advertising presence on that platform. So watch the space, and that could be the sort of thing, and again very typical in Amazon behaviour, right? A bit of test and trial, see what happens, and is there enough interest to validate a fulfillment solution here? Yeah,
and they're just so willing to kind of lose money or just break even for years and years and years. There's that kind of famous Bezos quote, your margin is my opportunity. And they just featureize whole industries and kind of give them a way to kind of keep you in their in their ecosystem. And that's, you can have your own opinions about the sort of business morality and whether that should, how a commerce commission, if we had a functioning one, should look at that kind of behavior. But fundamentally, it's proven a very effective strategy to run on just pure growth and almost never take the margin that the likes of Google and Facebook and Apple have.
Well, the other interesting thing about Amazon, and again, I'm drawing some inference here around what they've done in the US, but they are slowly emerging as the key aggregator of streaming services, and they have a product called Amazon Channels.
This is actually, I think, maybe where the thing really, really can work.
Yeah. And so in the US, you can sign up to, Disney Plus, Max, other things via the Amazon service. And for Amazon, you stay on their platform, as you've talked about, they're collecting and interrogating that data, very, very valuable for part of their overall deal. And they recently just announced Apple TV going onto that platform, which was a real surprise for many, many people. No one thought that Apple would give away kind of their brand and hand it over to someone else in that environment, but they have. And so if that's a model that starts to roll out around the world, going back to the Sky deal, do we see a world in, 3-5 years where actually Amazon Prime is the home of carrying Max, Peacock, other services in New Zealand because it's a cheap way to get distributed or a cost-effective way, I should say, to get distributed in the market.
And you look at the way that they've moved. They've taken a few NFL games in the US. So it might be that by the end of this decade, the sports rights bid isn't. It's not Sky and no one or Sky and a bit of TVNZ, but Prime actually can. If you've got a direct-to-consumer service as a sports organisation, that Prime ends up being the sort of best bidder there, and they've got the infrastructure of both subscribers, propensity data around what people have bought, and then they can just plug you into that giant network and then sell ads against it. So it's a formidable machine they're building, and a small market like New Zealand, which might be hard for a Max, is the logic around it. If you have such a joined up business as Amazon's, makes a bit more sense.
You're also seeing, Duncan, I know we should move off this topic and talk about rugby, but you're seeing this interesting battlefield play out in streaming in New Zealand where, you've got a pay platform like Neon, you've got a free platform like 3Now, you've got a hybrid platform coming like Amazon introducing their ad tier, and then you've got TVNZ Plus trying to straddle a pay world and a free world on TVNZ Plus, and that's coming down. And so it'll be interesting to see out of those platform strategies which one starts to emerge as the winning strategy. I don't think anyone's figured that out quite around the world at this point, but it will be figured out.
Yeah, and the hard thing, I guess, is that it's still, as much as we've had sort of consolidation and we're seeing some of the things that are separate in the US become part of other products here, it's still a lot for the average consumer, especially in a market of this size. So that does figure to be something which continues to evolve. Let's talk quickly about the news out of New Zealand Rugby commercial that Craig Fenton, who as I said, interviewed on this podcast recently and was talking up, as is his job, the prospects of that and the strategy that they were rolling out. He's left citing basically a difference of strategic opinion there, and left at a very critical time during the negotiations with Sky. What did you make of the announcement and the news itself?
Yeah, I was astounded by the honesty of the announcement, to be honest, to, state that there was this difference of opinion. You often don't see that when CEOs step down. It is often a lot more vanilla.
They've worked very hard to make those like plausible sentences that have no news value.
That's right. And so that's quite a statement, isn't it? Because it talks to potentially the board and Craig not seeing eye to eye on the strategy, or perhaps the results of the strategy. It's hard to know, right? We don't know the detail. And I think the timing of this is really interesting. I'm not sure when the exclusive negotiating period ends, whether it was end of September, end of October with NZR, but I know it's close. And so for him to step down in the middle of this means that, someone else is going to be leading that. There's going to be a different decision-making process inside NZR now at a pretty critical juncture, I imagine, for the negotiation. So, fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, so speaking to Craig, there was a sense that they were not expecting radically improved revenue out of the Sky deal, which is the biggest source of revenue into New Zealand Rugby commercial, and widely that there is an expectation actually that will go down, and it might change a bit, that they'll put some more rugby on free to air, that maybe they'll keep some for their own service and so on, but to keep it level, you needed to find some more revenue sources, and part of that was this idea that you could maybe sell those rights internationally for more than they've historically got. It's been a boom time for sports rights internationally, but there is a bit of a cleavage where the really premium ones are getting, you look at that recent NBA deal, they're getting kind of crazy money, but if you're in that sort of sports middle class thing, it can be harder to command, the sort of the extra eye-watering level of rights. But I sort of reached out to New Zealand Rugby for comment about this. The one thing that they were able to sort of say is, and of course they're going to say this, is that they've got a big team working on their broadcast negotiations, and it won't impact that. I mean, you don't want to lose your CE during a negotiation. No one plans for that. So it can't have no impact, but I do have no doubt that they've got a big filled out negotiation there. Yeah,
they will absolutely have a very clear plan, and they'll be executing against that plan. We don't know how they may pivot against that with Craig's exit, don't know. I think one of the interesting things about this strategy, so clearly the strategy at its most simple terms is if we can make more money overseas, we can offset a possible decline in New Zealand and be kept whole, arguably grow a little bit and put more money into the game, more money into grassroots, strengthen New Zealand rugby is kind of broadly the thesis. The interesting thing about that is that overseas, you talked about NBA, and NFL was probably the best in the business, and English Premier League, they're probably the two that are the best at this. They are selling sports rights to leagues, entire competitions to players. New Zealand Rugby are not doing that. They are not selling the rights to a league or an overall competition.
Well, they are with Super Rugby, but Super Rugby is not the prize.
Correct,
and that's the problem.
That's right. It's the All Blacks that obviously draw the crowds and draw the eyeballs, and so there is a difference there in terms of the kind of go-to-market strategy, which is quite nuanced and I think quite tricky. And rugby, as you've talked about, is not globally, I revere it, we love it, right? It's just part of our DNA, but obviously overseas, it's, in most countries, it's not a tier 1 sport. It's probably a tier 2. And so trying to command those premiums,
Well, and the time zones, if you're going to the UK with your All Blacks rights package, and this is a 7 a.m. game a lot of the time, and that's partly why we don't get any afternoon rugby, because that will be a 2 a.m. game in the UK and Europe, which are where most of the best other big rugby markets are. So it's difficult. The other thing I wondered about with the strategic, with that unusually pointy strategic misalignment statement was Craig is ex-Google for a long time. He's a big believer in YouTube as a platform. And I think I'm a big believer in YouTube as a platform, right?
Yeah.
Like it's incredibly successful. It's on connected TVs. It's the biggest channel in the US now. But it's the house always wins. It's not actually necessarily all that good for creators. Unless they're an individual who's figured out a great niche, it works for them. But if you're a scale organisation like New Zealand Rugby, they have done really well. They've grown to more than 800,000 subscribers, but it's a volume play. And then, are you getting sufficient ad revenue for it to be meaningful? And the theory of it was that Craig put forward was that having a big social audience was going to be helpful in terms of the big sort of jersey rights, sponsorship negotiations coming up in a few years' time. Those are the ones that they're expecting to go up. So I wonder if the returns that they were getting on from YouTube, and they'd sort of done some kind of more long-term maths about it. Because there was also, a bit of an aside, but when New Zealand Rugby, NZR Plus was launched a year ago, it certainly wasn't talked about as a YouTube strategy. It was talked about as a destination play, and they had this Taika series and various things. And by all accounts, that hasn't really happened. So they pivoted to YouTube. Does this indicate that they're now pivoting again potentially? I'm just sort of curious about how, with Silver Lake in the background, having made this huge investment in, I no doubt signed off, if not installed Craig as the CE, it does tend to indicate that they're not in a great place now vis-a-vis that investment.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. So, and this is all speculation, of course, but the reason, you go down that YouTube path or you go down other social media path is to build the fandom as strong as you possibly can ahead of the commercial negotiation, with a promise that negotiation is going to bring some windfall. Now, that takes years to get right, typically, and I just wonder, given the timing of the Sky negotiation, whether they're starting to look at the quantum around what is going to be attained domestically versus internationally, and that international numbers could possibly got a big question mark over it. And people are starting to feel nervous and a bit squiffy about the strategy, and and perhaps that's what's led to the disagreement between Craig and other members.
Yeah, well, and we'll see. There's a replacement to be announced. There's obviously the results of the Sky deal itself. So. Yeah, we'll keep up with that. One final thing just before we go is that we'll keep up with the ongoing saga that is the Fair Digital News Bargaining Bill, which obviously had the big bombshell announcement that Google was if it went through in its current form, they were dropping news wholesale. The couple of interesting developments during the week. You had Mark Jennings from Newsroom, saying that basically if the bill was passed in its current form, it would be very bad. That's probably the most public statement that anyone who's got a significant voice in this has made. But and does tend to indicate that the bill, which doggedly supported by NPA, it might not be wholly supported by the balance of the industry. I've certainly. Wrote the piece advocating for a hard look at a Canadian compromise. But the big thing that came out this week was basically a sort of a draft idea tabled in Australia's Parliament about that it's almost acknowledged that some of the problems with their version of the bargaining bill, which was the world's first, might be unresolvable, and that some form of a combination of a levy that applied to all digital advertising players and must-carry provisions that basically force you to kind of have some news on your platforms, whether that be search, social, etc., might be a better path forward. And that's definitely shaken up the environment. What did you make of that report and its potential impacts on the local environment?
Yeah, well, we do know that the New Zealand government tend to look to Australia in terms of a lot of reform legislation. And my view, having read the Australian parliamentary paper, it is the most comprehensive solution to the issues of how the international platforms show up and contribute to a local economy and all media companies within that environment. Being able to put a levy, for example, on advertising is something that is, concrete, market-based, predictable, all of the things that, the Googles of the world and I suspect Meta's look for is kind of encapsulated and
didn't like about the bargaining bill framework, which was for Australia, Canada, and that was on the books here.
Yeah,
it's interesting, right? Like when I've spoken to Goldsmith privately, and certainly I think he's said as much publicly. He's like, we're a national government. We don't like levies. We don't like taxes. But I think if you have every player in a situation saying, well, this is much preferable to what you're doing, and the neighbouring state in Australia that you had looked to kind of align your legislation with is also moving in that direction, that potentially opens the door to it. Very, very early days. We have no clue how that's landing with Goldsmith, or even, the extent to which the sort of wider news business is going to process it. Some indication there's more interest in it in terms of conversations I've had, but it was a big development and another big news week in this industry.
We should unpack it actually for the listeners properly in the next pod and go through the details and what it could mean if we were to apply it here.
Yeah, I think so. All right, thank you so much for coming on the fold today, Glenn. And
you're welcome.
Thanks, I hear, for recording and our listeners for listening.